And I talked to my agent, who I've worked with for the last 15 years, who's knowledgeable about building it as well as real estate. And I said, okay, I'm thinking, maybe I blow some more insulation in the attic and I do this up and I do this. And he goes, no.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. I'm Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Fine Homebuilding Editorial Director Andrew Zellner.
Morning, Patrick.
Fine Homebuilding Editorial Advisor Mike Girton.
Hi there.
Fine Homebuilding and Taunton Senior Producer Jeff Rose.
Howdy.
Please email your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Guys, it's great to see you this morning. Thanks for being here.
Always happy to be here.
Good to see
Mike,
you too.
Mike, are you back in Rhode Island?
Yeah, I'm playing the East Coast, West Coast every couple of weeks now.
Did you fly back recently? When did you get there?
I got back a day and a half ago, so I'm still on Arizona time, but that's okay. I still get things done here.
Yeah, so you're like, this is probably not as early as it would have been, but I'm guessing it was nice to sleep in just a little bit. Otherwise, yeah.
Yeah, and I had so much stuff going on out there, getting things done, and then, landing back here in Rhode Island, and all of the things I haven't been taking care of for the last 3 weeks have piled up. So, but I did out there, since the last podcast, Addison and I had finished up the converting the barn to a garage, which was important, so I could put my truck in my camper and keep them away from the pack rats and the dust and everything. And then after we went to the Grand Canyon, we had 3 days that I had left, buffer days, in case the barn to garage conversion needed some more attention. And instead, we hopped on a project I was planning for the fall and got really far through it, which is taking a porch and enclosing it. It was a slab, and it had a roof on it and had like half walls. So we took the brick half walls out, put walls up, framed it in, put windows. And I did the first thing something I've never done before, which is a mid-wall installed window, which is a flanged window. You can put an Audi window, an any window, or what most building science folks say now is you put it right in the middle of that wall, whether it's a 2x6 wall or a double stud wall. And we had one of each. We had a double stud wall and a 2x6 wall. But with the triple glazed windows from Europe, they have no flanges, so you kind of set them in the middle inside of a sleeve. It's pretty straightforward. You're just counting on that flashing tape to do all the ceiling work. But when you have a conventional flanged window, now you have to overframe the size of the rough opening so it accounts for the flange. And then you have to build a buck on the inside, which gives you a lot more detail to get the flashing right, along with having a slope on the outside. So I was thinking that, boy, that would be a good article that I've never seen, is how to detail out one of these mid-wall installed windows with the flashing system. I think everybody's seen the how-to an Audi window, but these inset windows make it a little bit more challenging, actually a lot more challenging.
So would you call it a double buck then, or is like a buck and a half?
Yeah, a buck and a half. Like that. Yeah.
So this is a common look in that area, right? I've heard about this before. You put the window in for aesthetics and probably to shade a little from the sun, right?
Yeah, and it's part of the Adobe style that you see more in New Mexico than you do in Arizona, but it is that style where you've got the inset window.
So the way I've heard how this is assembled, and correct me if I'm wrong, is so you take like a 2x6 wall and you frame the opening to the flange size, and then you put a 2x4 on the inside for fastening the flange through, and that's what creates the inset, and then you tape the snot out of it, I'm guessing, to make it watertight. Yeah.
Yeah, and think about the taping the snot out of it is now you've got to put in a sill pan, which is under the window on top of that 2x4 buck. Then it's got to come down the front of the 2x4, and then it's got to come out that 2 inches or so that you've got the inset, and then integrate it with your WRB and all of that, or your siding. And yeah,
What
it
I
just
don't understand
makes
about
the result.
Southwest architecture is everything, but why not just do it the easy way and put it at the sheathing layer?
Well, because you think about even in other parts of the country where you're building a high performance home, and most of the building scientists are saying that we're really best off to put that window in the middle of that opening for a number of reasons. Not only a little bit of shading, but also a little extra water protection from the water cascading down your wall, and then it's putting it in a little bit to the warmer side of the wall so that reducing the condensation potential on the inside, where you're getting a little more air circulating instead of a dead pocket of air in that very deep window well, particularly if you're doing a double stud wall.
I'm going to defer to our arbiter of practicality. Jeff, what do you think about this?
I'm sure the building science side of it must be solid, but I mean, I guess it makes sense. It's just a different way of doing it.
Yeah. Seems way harder, but it is a cool look. I will concede. Andrew, what have you been doing?
Continuing the post-winter yard cleanup.
What have you found that's been especially exciting that was buried under snowpack?
Nothing unexpected. I've sort of got an area to the side of my garage where, when I'm buying new building materials, I store them there, or when I'm removing old building materials, I keep them there. And I forgot how much stuff I had removed from my home over the course of winter. I found I remodeling the basement, not only were there pieces, doors installed in the basement, but then you find some in a walled off nook somewhere that the homeowner just left there because they were part of the house at some point. And so I've got 6 doors hanging out by my garage, and part of me is these are useful things and I need to hang on to them, and part of me is you already have all of the doors in your house. Why do you need more doors hanging out?
So I've seen folks make pretty cool headboards and furniture with old doors. Have you considered something like that to scratch your woodworking itch?
A little bit of that. I've also, one of the doors is, probably not, I wouldn't say original to the house, but probably 80 years old. And I'm thinking about the old growth lumber inside of that door and maybe disassembling it and repurposing it. But then, you also have to be wary of, stray fasteners. It's probably has lead paint on it,
Yep.
all that kind of stuff. So
we were talking at a meeting the other day about how difficult it is to salvage material. Folks want to do it, but it's hard, and you can ruin expensive tooling or make yourself sick with lead. It's hard. Jeff, do you have any exciting updates from your homestead?
No. I've also have been working outside, so moving piles of dirt. Nothing exciting at all about that.
Have you found an opportunity to use heavy machinery to move these piles of dirt?
It's not enough dirt to really warrant heavy machinery. If I had heavy machinery, yes, in a minute. But to go out and rent, no.
Yeah.
Keep hoping my neighbor will see me moving it and say, "Hey, let me come by."
Does this neighbor have a loader backhoe or something? Yeah. I would definitely make friends with that person. I wanted to share something with y'all that I found in the New York Times, and it's something that I've said on the show, and of course I'm, going to support my own opinion at any opportunity. So this is from the opinion section of the New York Times, written by the editorial board, dated May 4th. The United States needs 47,300 gigawatt miles of new power lines by 2035. I looked it up. A gigawatt is 1 billion watts. We need to expand the current grid by 57%, according to the Energy Department. A 2021 report by the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine arrived at a similar figure. To hit that target, the United States needs to double the pace of power line construction. And the current grid was constructed over more than a century, but we need to do this within a dozen years. So building what amounts to a new power grid on a similar scale in a small fraction of the time is a daunting challenge. It will require tens of billions of dollars in financing, vast quantities of steel and aluminum, and thousands of specialized workers. But building it is the easy part. What makes the target virtually impossible to hit is the Byzantine approval process that typically includes separate reviews by every municipality and state through which a power line will pass, as well as a host of federal agencies. Who the heck wants a power line in their backyard? Who is going to make this easy for companies to get this work done? I ask you all, what do you think?
I think it's like a significant lift in a short amount of time. But the flip side of it is, it's not like an either or situation. Like we're going to need new infrastructure. We're going to need to invest in new infrastructure. So my father-in-law works for Excel Energy. He got to start as a lineman, and it's like it's a dangerous job, but it's a very good job, and it's the also the kind of job that you can get into right after high school. Get like it's like interesting to think about. We need more folks building houses, but we need more folks building everything. And there's going to be a massive investment on the infrastructure utility side as well. And it's like there's just not enough people to do any of this work.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I was just thinking on the labor side, with all of the things I've been hearing from the AI revolution that's going to put a lot of IT people out of work, as well as other people. All those people just have to shift to tool belts and working on lines and other things. So maybe there'll be it'll coincide the downturn in the labor force on the professional side and moving more towards the blue collar, hands-on, and putting all this stuff together.
On the latter subject, I have another piece that was in the New Yorker, dated April 24th. It's called The Great Electrician Shortage by David Owens. It is a fantastic long-form piece. I recommend you all read it. I'm going to read a short section of it here. According to a recent report published by the Associated Builders and Contractors, a trade group, job openings in the construction industry averaged 390,000 a month in 2022, and the shortfall was made more ominous by the fact that roughly a quarter of existing workers are older than 55. One reason for the skilled labor gap is the work is real work. He talks about having his power restored after an outage in Connecticut, which is alarmingly common. The crew who worked to restore power to the houses on our road spent Christmas Eve in bucket trucks, buffeted by winds so strong they made the screens on our porch hum like kazoos. Lemieux told me that he's had apprentices who quit after a few months because they had decided the job was too wet, too messy, too cold, too dirty, too hot. I'm sure it's all of those things. A more significant factor may be that for decades, employers, educators, politicians, and parents have argued that the only sure ticket to a good life in America is a college degree. People who graduate from college do earn more on average than people who don't, but the statistics can be misleading. Many young people who start don't finish college, yet still take on tens of thousands in educational loans. And those who do graduate often discover that the economic advantage of holding a degree can be negated for years by the cost of having acquired it. So I learned today that electricians on average make about $65,000 a year, which is about what a journalist makes. In their first year, I should add, and I'm guessing
That's the important thing, is that you can get right out of a trade school or a program, an in-house training program, and you can be right up there at earning potential way higher than you can in an out-of-university job often.
This gentleman, Lemieux, who I believe he runs a line crew, but he was talking about how one of his apprentices just bought a house, and that is unheard of for college graduates, right? Right out of school. That's crazy. To further confirm that issue we're dealing with here. Last year, Stanley Black & Decker published a report called the Makers Index, which estimated that there were 650,000 unfilled jobs in construction-related trades in the U.S. and 10 million worldwide. So even more than other statistics would indicate.
And those will not be offshored.
No, that's just it, Mike, right?
Yep.
It was like, you can't offshore electricians or plumbers' work. This comes from Matt in Baltimore. On your podcast a few weeks ago, a listener wrote in asking about coverage of the structural brick row houses he works on in Philadelphia. I haven't heard anything on the subject for a few weeks and figured I'd add my own thoughts and experience. The majority of my work is on structural brick row homes in Baltimore, mainly from 1900 to 1920. There are definitely a few unique things we have to deal with. The roofs are joined together, and it's not uncommon for a careless roofer to cause leaks in neighboring houses. For the majority of these houses' lives, they have had hot tar mopped on every few years. When you need to replace a skylight or vent a bathroom through the roof, I'd had to cut through roofing tar that was 6 inches thick to get a skylight replaced. By the way, the best tool I found for this job is a hatchet. Any kind of saw melts the tar and ruins the saw blade. Deck ledgers usually need to be through bolted, which frequently means having to drill through 12 to 16 inches of brick, sometimes with a joist right on the other side. This calls for some long drill bits. It's almost guaranteed that the electrical panel is on the back wall with all the wires coming out right where you need to drill. That's always the case. A lot of work on front porches, and some blocks have a porch roof design where the beam spans the property line and the houses share one extra wide staircase. A lot of times these are box beams with no 2x material inside of it. I've come across many houses where someone has replaced the 1x on the one side of the box beam and just cut at the neighbor's property line, which leaves both sides unsupported. Replacing this involves getting both neighbors on board to adequately span and support the beam. There are other issues, such as having to set up workstations on the sidewalk because no one has a yard, and brick firewalls between properties make attaching anything just a little harder. But there are positives too. In Baltimore, houses were usually built a block at a time by the same developer. If you know one house on a block, you know them all. And this comes from Matt Baker, Home Improvement. Matt, thank you very much for your insights on that. That's really interesting. I'm just wondering, like, do you have to wait till 10 o'clock in the morning before you can start drilling into,
You can imagine the vibration and sound going through two neighbors on either side in their dwelling.
He made me laugh when he's talking about having to drill always where there is an electrical panel, and I don't know why that is, but it does seem to be too common.
I was listening to an interesting podcast yesterday, which had some tangential relationship to this, which got to the point of, these are these row houses and a lot of the different types of homes that'll be in neighborhoods where they're right next to each other, whether it's in Brooklyn or in Philadelphia or in Pittsburgh or wherever. These are the type of neighborhoods that are visually attractive. You walk down the street and if they're well kept, but zoning and building codes today make it very difficult to build this type of home where they're adjoining, the roofs are overlapping, there's no separation of either space or firewalls. And then we get, a condo complex with a big parking lot and things like that. So it's unfortunate.
But we have 6 parking spots for every car in America. And, yeah.
There was an Onion article a few days ago that was like, Houston announces that for every parking spot in the city of Houston, you also need 10 parking spots.
Perfect.
I love the Onion. This comes from Bob the Upholsterer from Old Cherryville Port. While listening to podcast 559, I laughed when you talked about charging more to wealthy clients. I wish I could say we don't, but we totally do at my upholstery shop. We have found that we have clients from upper class areas that jump at our low prices, and then they get their own fabric for $400 a yard. So we lose up on the markup, and then they try to haggle the price, labor price at delivery. We tend to up their labor costs for clients in these areas. There's no set amount. Sometimes we base it on the customer's attitude when talking about the piece. Everyone does that who has to bid work for clients. You're just like, is this person going to make my life easy or difficult? And you can guess what's more expensive. On another note, I went to visit friends up in Ocean Park. I saw a renovation underway that looked well done and fit the look of the area. Also, the culvert, or whatever it's called, on New Salt Road was totally destroyed this winter. The neighbor said it's going to take forever to fix because it's in a national wildlife refuge. My friend grew up there throwing rocks into the creek. The old neighbor said that they were going to clog it up, and 30 years later, she was correct. Please call me Bob the upholsterer from Old Cherryport so my clients don't find out about the secret upcharging.
You know, the cost of materials and upcharging, I think, is sort of interesting. You know, like I sort of value my own labor at a certain price. But if somebody is like, hey, here's this really expensive thing, and I want you to cut into it, and by doing so, you also assume like the liability for preserving this very expensive thing. That, you know, that I feel like you're totally justified to charge more to that person using expensive materials.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yep.
And, you know, contractors of all stripe charge markup on material because sometimes you have to eat the cost of it. Sometimes you have to do it again. Sometimes you have to spend tons of time arranging to get it or get it to the right place or whatever. It's a hassle.
And more than once, I've had clients who bring something to the job site that they want to, source themselves. And the learning curve to figure out how to work with it or make it fit on the job ends up increasing the cost of labor. And it's not something you can price up front because you don't know what you're going to encounter working with these unusual oddball materials. There's lots of things that get involved in pricing and upcharging to make it profitable to be in business.
It's a necessity, right? It's if you don't want to go broke,
charge a lot.
Yeah,
to everybody.
Yeah.
This comes from Justin, our friend, the crazy mailman from Oklahoma. We talked about his brick veneer and making your own windows, and his email generated a lot of conversation, so thanks for that, Justin. Hello again, FHB friends. I'm so happy I could at least give you all a good laugh and generate some good discussion. Thank you all enough for taking the time to answer my questions. We're going to have someone come out to examine our brick and cracking issues. My wife won't let me put anything up myself until someone helps to determine what needs to be done. But I am determined to do the work myself if at all feasible. It's not that I don't trust a specialist who would do it better and faster. It's what I want the experience and knowledge for myself and to know that I have the ability to learn new skills and fix things as they come up. I'm a philomath at heart. Andrew, what does that mean?
Not being a philomath myself, I don't know.
I had to look it up. And there's actually a town somewhere named Philomath, but the definition of the term is someone who likes to learn, who enjoys and feels, they're building their own knowledge base.
So I guess I am probably a philomath.
Yeah, I think
we all are.
Yeah. He says, nothing excites me more than having the opportunity to learn something new, expand the knowledge I already have, and to practice and refine practical and useful skills. I value knowledge more than almost anything else. There are certain caveats, and I truly believe that knowledge is empowering. Combine that with the practical skills, and you have a recipe for a gratifying and fulfilled life. Besides, the more I learn how little I know. Always having something new to discover excites me. Oh, by the way, he says, I play the podcast segment where you discuss making your windows for my wife, and she's now willing to let me do it.
That's a very valuable service that we've provided there.
That's great. Keep us posted, please, Justin the mailman. And he went on to say he sent a pretty long email, but his bunch of family members are in the trades, and as he described, he's the black sheep of the family as working in the postal service. So he's going to have the opportunity to boost his chops on the house.
I do like, I share Justin's enthusiasm for, learning a new thing and knowing I can do the work myself. And sort of the rule my wife and I have is I'm allowed to attempt almost anything if what I'm doing isn't going to make the professional we may have to hire's job any harder or like destroy anything irreparable as I'm working on the house. And that encompasses almost everything on a home. So
you can really mess up cars by working on them yourselves to make it way more expensive to have it fixed. I think houses are tougher. I mean, of course, you could create serious problems with structural repairs. Things can go bad very quickly, but outside of cutting through water pipes, it seems pretty low risk. Do you guys agree, or have you seen folks get in way over their head and mess stuff up sufficiently that it costs more to fix?
I think what happens where it costs more to fix is where somebody takes on a project and actually take a finished basement, for example, and they read something online, they put poly on the wall, they put some bats in the cavity between a stud wall and the poly, and they don't manage the moisture well, and they didn't solve the leaks problem that was already existing, and then they sell the house, and 3 years later somebody has to gut the whole basement because it's just full of mold and moisture problems. So that's where I see more of the problems. It's not in the repair or the maintenance side. It's when they tackle a project and just make big mistakes with latent problems.
I'm sure that's true, and that's an excellent point. You could make, bad decisions regarding flashing windows or roofing, and it would all be very expensive to fix later because it was done poorly the first time, sure.
Think flip houses.
I try not to think about them, Mike, but they seem to show up in my life a lot. This comes from Maria. Greetings. I'm an avid listener to the FHP podcast. I'm not an industry pro, just a regular homeowner in the design phase of a new home build in the mountains of central Washington. I'm hoping you can provide some insight into advanced framing techniques. We're in climate zone 5 with super hot summers, cold, snowy, wet winters. The west border of the property is a fairly busy 40-mile-per-hour street. I work some nights and I'm really concerned that the house will be noisy, which is primarily why we're interested in added insulation. However, there are great views to the southwest, which we would like to optimize with windows. We're also trying to use the most passive solar gain and build as environmentally consciously as possible. We plan to have a single pitch roof that slopes downward to the northeast, so essentially the road noise, the views, and the summer heat are generally on the same side of the house. Our designer sounds fairly unenthusiastic about advanced framing techniques. He said yes, to double offset will help insulation, but significantly added cost primarily due to the materials. He did not offer exterior insulation as an option, though, so I wonder about this. My question, is it worth considering double offset studs or exterior insulation primarily for noise reduction as well as added insulation? Or, especially since the biggest wall facing the road will have several large windows, even if those are triple panes, will it be worth the added insulation, or we will just be paying more for minimal gains? We do have a budget, and adding any of these options will be a significant stretch financially. Thanks for your expertise, Maria. So what do we think? Can you have a great view and sound attenuation, I guess is how we boil this question down. Am I right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And I ran some numbers just to give a basis for something feedback, and it shouldn't cost very much more to get some additional insulation in the walls, which can help, and do offset studs at advanced framing. So advanced framing is really could just be a single stud wall, like 2x6 or even 2x4 at 24 centers with minimal frame, single top plate and other things. But I think what Maria is talking about here is doing the double stud wall so that you end up with less sound transmission through the studs. And that's a good way to go. So I figuring that it's going to be the tallest wall of the house, since you're going to have the glass on it. I'm figuring roughly 60 feet long, 12 feet tall. And if you figure you frame that with 2x4 studs, 12 feet long, you're going to end up with an extra 40 studs and plates at $5.50 a piece. So it's $220 for the wall, for the materials. Minimal time to frame that. 2 guys could frame that in probably half a day. So labor is not going to be a big deal. Dense packet with cellulose. So if you have a double 2x4 stud wall, and you figure, I'm just figuring it's going to be 2x for the cost of cellulose, maybe only 1.5x, figuring that the labor's already there. So I would figure an extra $1,000 to $1,500 to insulate that extra wall. So now we're at less than $2,000 for an improved both thermal and sound. I'm saying dense packed cellulose because in my experience and that of many other people, when you put in dense packed cellulose into walls, it really kills the sound of road noise or air traffic. I live on the flight path into the Providence airport, and I don't know that the planes are flying over when I'm inside my house. And I only have double pane windows. That's probably where the biggest cost is going to be. But I think, Maria, if you shop around, you can find some triple glazed windows, which are manufactured locally to you, like vinyl replacement window styles, as opposed to the European super insulated, very high performance type of triple glaze. The less expensive triple glaze are often used to retrofit homes around airports for the sound attenuation. So look around for some basic triple paned windows, triple glazed windows, and I think you might find that for just a few $1,000s more, not budget busting numbers, you should be able to get a high performance and sound attenuated wall.
And air seal the heck out of it, because that's key, right? If you have air leaks, that is going to defeat all of this work. So
yeah, I was gonna add fixed pane windows. Maybe that whole wall.
Good point. Good point.
One other relatively inexpensive, especially if you're doing it at the construction phase. I thought about doing a double layer of sheetrock on the inside. Although you're and even exploring some green glue or something. But the windows at that point are going to be the weakest link in the wall. So
you were nodding earlier, Jeff. You have thoughts on this subject?
No, just the idea of fixed windows.
Yeah, I thought the same thing, and you can't open them if they're tall anyway. So think about that.
So another question, I guess, is so I've been getting a ton of press releases from a window insert company, and so they make I think it's in either interior or exterior, but it's the equivalent of a storm window, but it's meant to be an additional pane that you kind of fix in place on the inside of your house, the press release claims a bunch of stuff, but essentially, you're turning a double pane window into a triple pane window, but you've got a little bit bigger of a gap. And when I was building recording studio spaces, that window between the control room and the live room is just 2 panes of glass that are set into there's probably a 6-inch gap in between those panes of glass, and you tilt one so sound reflections aren't parallel. And you're sort of building your own window. I'd never thought about doing that on an exterior wall because, I'm curious about the potential for moisture in that space, or, is it better to have a bigger air gap, or is it better to have, multiple panes of glass with a smaller air gap? Have any of you built up a double or triple pane window assembly kind of thing on an exterior wall?
Mike's about to.
I will on my own house, but I've been thinking the same thing. It's going to be the condensation potential if there's any moisture that's getting into that space, but you can manage that with some desiccants, but you'd have to be able to remove the panel to remove the desiccant to then regenerate it or get the moisture out of it. So I don't know enough about it to speak intelligently, but I think from a sound perspective, everything you're saying makes perfect sense. And it might be something Maria could use, especially if those insert windows, adding an extra pane on the inside, could be removed to let the air dry out any moisture that might accumulate. So
just buy some triple pane windows and get on with your life, Maria. Because storing these things and putting them in and out, I don't know.
Yeah, you got to value your own labor at some point too.
Yeah. And boy, I can tell you from my observation, the cost of even European windows that are triple pane, especially when they're made in Eastern Europe, are freaking pretty affordable. It's surprising how much they've come down in cost. And I think they're vinyl, but by most accounts, they're excellent. If any of you out there have experience installing or clients with these, or if you have them in your own house, I would love to hear about your less expensive triple pane windows. And I guess there are domestic makers of these too now, right? Marvin, I'm sure, has one. I don't know who else has one. Speaking of ceiling fenestration, we should mention that today's after show is going to be Andrew's grab bag. Andrew's going to drill us on home building topics, and very much like we did with Samantha's house a couple weeks ago, we're going to talk to Andrew about his place and future projects, what have you. So stay tuned for that. This comes from Ouray. Did I say that right? Ouray? And this spring, he says, I'll be starting a build on my own home. As I work through the various details, I have come to the garage doors as being a major leak in the shop envelope. I'm wondering if I could oversize the garage door on 3 sides to accommodate additional weather stripping as shown in the attached picture. So I'm going to try and explain this. He's made the door much larger than the opening and used where it overlaps the wall to put an additional weather stripping layer that I'm presuming the door would slide against, right? So think of it like a brushed weather strip, except the door is going vertical instead of traveling along a hinged path, an arc. Did I do a decent job explaining that?
I think so.
What do you guys think? Is this legit?
I would, I wish we could ask Ouray a couple of questions. He mentions a shop. I think a lot of people assume that because garages usually have overhead lifting garage doors, that is you have to have a garage door in your shop. All of the most successfully air sealed and insulated shops that I know of limit the amount of overhead doors and either do carriage style or fab something up that looks like a garage door, and you have a different entry point somewhere else. Because I think what he's put together here is sort of the assumption that you need a garage door for whatever you're doing, maybe isn't the best thing, especially if you're self-building.
Especially if it's going to be truly conditioned, truly kept at a comfortable temperature all the time. But playing devil's advocate, what if they want to store a car in this building in addition to it being a shop? And that's a very common scenario with hobby woodworkers, right?
It's less common than you'd think because, at some point you just fill the shop full of stuff. You can't get a car in there. But I also appreciate the ability to not have to get out of your car to open a garage door and drive in like you would with carriage doors. Yeah.
From a functional standpoint, if you can get one good seal, it's going to be as good as doing 2 or 3 marginally done seals. So if you can figure out a way to get a really good seal better than what you get out of the conventional, the conventional gaskets that they use for the overhead doors are just a piece of rubber flip, like a rubber flange on a piece of wood or a piece of plastic, and it just presses against the door. But if you can get I've never looked around to see if there are better solutions for that, but if there are better gaskets for an overhead door, that could be get a good one and then install that. Make sure you reduce the amount of airflow, because that's really what we're talking here. It's not so much the insulation value of those gaskets, it's keeping the air from leaking. And
the concern is real because overhead doors are terrible most times with keeping out air, and this is a laudable goal, but I think it's hard. And for the reason Andrew mention carriage style doors, because it's a lot easier to seal against a stop with a weather strip in it than it is to seal a door that's sliding past some kind of seal. So,
I
if you can
think
get away with it, make carriage doors.
I think Mike's advice of, one really good seal is better than 3 okay seals. If you're self-building, maybe investing in a super awesome garage door is, it's like worth that extra upfront cost instead of having to try to think about multiple seals and oversizing your door and making sure all the parts still work, side of it.
I think a good first exercise would be go to a garage door showroom, a company that specializes this, and see what's available and see if there are better weather stripping options than what we are describing, which I've heard described as thermostop. Is that what you've heard it described as, Mike? The plastic with a little rubber flap on it, right? It's usually PVC in my experience.
Yeah. Yeah. There are really nice overhead doors as far as the panels themselves being a double wall with some polyiso in between, with a thermal break on the edges, and at each of the panels, when they close and they roll together, they have weather stripping as well as a profile which is like a
Blocks
tongue and
air.
groove
Yeah.
profile. Yeah. So the doors themselves, you can buy really nice doors. I did that myself on my garage because it is intended both for vehicle storage and as a shop. And I have not gotten to the point, though I'm very close to the point where I filled it up with so much tool stuff that I can't get a vehicle in there without shifting all the arrangement around. But I do like to have it available with the garage door. So I spent the extra money on the good door, but I don't have a good seal on it. And I found that it works just fine. It's just a regular rubber flap. And provided you don't have, I'm just heating it periodically, and I'm not worried about, that the air leakage over time, stealing all of the heat. If I heated that space, day in and day out, I only heat it when I need it for working in the winter.
I would also tell Ouray to really think about how this shop is going to get used. Are you going to keep it conditioned all the time? If you're not, don't even worry about it much, because you're just going to be heating the air to make it more comfortable when you are working in there. But if you have machinery that's going to rust, or you want to have it really comfortable, you're going to have to think harder about the door.
One of the biggest frustrations with the garage doors in my shop is it was a garage before I turned it into a shop. Are the overhead tracks for the doors are things like I'm always running into as I'm carrying stuff around the shop. Is there a better approach to that? Is there a way to get those tracks out of that overhead space?
There are ones that hug the ceiling, and they're a little better, but they're still going to be hanging down about 3 inches, is my guess, right?
Yeah.
I think barn door style, then you don't have the tracks.
Yeah.
Advantages.
There's so much advantages
door.
to that, and if you're a skilled carpenter, you can make your own carriage doors. I've done it myself. I've seen other carpenters do it. The hardware is expensive, but not nearly as expensive as an overhead door from a garage door company.
And that's what I did with Addison for the last couple weeks, turning an old horse barn into a garage. And we just made the whole gable end are 2 big 5-foot wide by, I think, 9.5 foot tall doors. And basically it's a frame. We just framed them out of 2x4s, put panels on them. And then though we didn't gasket them, we very easily could have, and got a well-sealing door.
If you want easy ways to make carriage style doors, look to any historic barn. There's going to be examples of board and batten doors, and maybe raised panel doors or flat panel doors. All cool stuff, and I think that's a way you can let your creativity shine and get something better than you could readily afford. Tom's got a big problem here. Let's get right to that. He says, I currently have a 2nd-story cantilevered balcony. The plan is to cut the cantilever joists off and install a traditional deck with posts beam and ledger, the local contractor wants to screw the ledger through the sheathing into the end grain of the cutoff floor joist, which doesn't sound right to me. I'm looking for a second opinion on properly attaching the new ledger. Safety for my family will be my top priority. Thanks for your time. I think safety's got to be the top priority with any deck building, right?
Yeah.
That's decks go bad.
And I believe we have a ledger expert on the show with us here today.
A ledger legend.
Well,
The ledger legend, yeah.
This question actually came to me directly through my email.
Through your
And,
ledger helpline.
Yeah, the ledger helpline. And Tom was asking, I'd like to hire you as a consultant on this. And I replied, I do free consulting. And but this happens a lot, especially with those second story cantilever balcony floors that might have been on a home built in the 60s or the 70s, and those joists that were sticking out probably weren't pressure treated, and they probably started to rot away, and then people want to retrofit.
And they're never flashed correctly is the other huge problem there, right? And yeah, so I'm going to back up a little bit and explain to folks how this works.
Yeah.
So you generally have a center girder that these joists attach to, and they span the floor and then keep going out the exterior wall and create a small balcony or even a bigger balcony that accessed by a patio door, right?
Yeah. And so they're the floor joist of your house, and they become the balcony joist, or they're sistered alongside the joist in the house. Now, the answer is no, you don't screw into the end grain of the joist. That's just a recipe for
disaster.
The fasteners, the nails, or the screws, hopefully, will pull right out of the end grain, if not initially, over time. You're going to have to determine how the house was framed. If it was done properly, there would be solid horizontal blocking in the position of where a rim joist would be. That would be, those blocks would be between each of these cantilever joists. So the rim joist of a house, when you attach a conventional ledger, is really that the attachment you're making is for vertical load. It's not for the load that is the lateral load, which is trying to pull the deck away from the house. So that solid blocking, if it is indeed there, you can attach either bolts or screws to fasten the ledger to into those blocks. Therefore, it'll transfer the load to the top plate of the wall below and then down through the whole framing down to the foundation. Then you would need to install some lateral connectors to the joist of the deck to the joist of the house, and that would prevent the deck from pulling away. So the ledger itself can be attached to those blocks, and structural screws are a good way to do it. Just look at the manufacturer of the screw. They'll have minimum end distances from where the screw is fastened to the end of either the ledger or the block. Usually it's 3 or 4 inches. So you'll be hitting the middle of the block. Also, if you're planning to have a step down from inside the living level of the house to the top of the deck, the lower row of fasteners, the lower row of screws can actually be driven right into the top plate of the wall. You have to hit the dead center there, and most of those manufactured screw companies will have a detail, and if you can't find it on their website, you can call their technical line, like Simpson Strong Tie or Fasten Master or Spax or any of the other manufacturers, and it'll give you the whether it will describe whether or not you need to put a pilot hole if you're going to drive the screw into that top plate. So there you've got opportunity to screw into the solid blocking and or into the top plate of the wall. Now, if there is no solid blocking between those joists, then the contractor or you would have to remove a strip of the wall sheathing, if there is wall sheathing there, and then install solid blocking between each of those joists. And then you could attach the ledger to that. So a couple of ways of approaching it that would work.
And you really have to pay attention to those fastening schedules and details for attaching ledgers with these structural screws. Some of them require pre-drilling, as what Mike was alluding to, especially in the top plate application, because if you put a dozen screws in there along the same plane without pre-drilling, there's a good chance you're going to be splitting stuff, and it's not going to have the designed load. So that's the important part there. Well, that was good. Do we have time for one more?
Yep.
Think so?
Yeah.
This comes from Canada Deck. He asked, will buyers pay a premium for improved footing/foundation details? I'm in British Columbia. The Provincial Housing Authority has published a very informative guide on best practices for footings and foundations. They point out a number of areas where they recommend best practice, where the recommended best practice exceeds minimum code requirements. If I was buying a home that I wanted to own for a long time, I would personally pay a premium for these extra details, given the consequences of water issues in the basement and the difficulty of making repairs down the road. However, I think I may be an exception. In the process of planning to build a new home that I will sell after living in it for a year or two, will other buyers pay more for a house if they know the builder paid attention to these details? How much extra does it make sense to invest? Or will the market generally assume that the building code is adequate and be much more concerned about countertops? Some examples that the guide recommends. Use gravel for all backfill. Use 6-inch PVC for footing drain pipes. Rough-in piping for radon evacuation, even if it's not required by local code. Apply a non-tankable waterproofing versus dam-proofing, and use a product that can bridge medium-sized cracks. Have any of you heard the expression non-tankable? What the heck does that mean? I don't know.
No idea.
It suggests a capillary break between footings and foundation walls and a wider footing than bare minimum. Okay, so what do we think? Will buyers pay to have a better built Mike is shaking his head already. No, because they don't know enough, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
It's very unfortunate. The extra work that good builders do when they build a new house, a custom home, many of the homeowners, even that they're building the home for, even when it's explained to them, here's why we're going to spend a little extra money on this, this, and this, they're like, yeah, do we have to? I just really, I want the granite countertops. I want the quartz countertops. I want, this finish or that finish. They don't get it. It's so hard to convey that to most homeowners, and especially when it's being sold not as a custom project, but it's being sold after it's already built, and to justify the cost of those things. Now, I always build the extra things, and all of these are good, except for the 6-inch PVC for the footing drain. That's
too.
usually
That is
not
too
necessary.
much pipe. Yeah.
But all of the other things are things that I do because it gives me peace of mind that I'm not going to get a call back 3 or 4 or 5 years later because they're going to have a problem with the house. But to do
I think the wider footing doesn't make a lot of sense too. The compressive loads on general, normal houses, residential loads, are pretty light. If you have decent soils, I would not worry about that. I think it's more important to put reinforcement in than, that's sometimes considered excessive. I've heard. The capillary break between the footing and the foundation wall, that's easy, right? We've decided that's paint, right? Yeah.
Very inexpensive, yeah. And even the waterproof coating's very inexpensive as an upgrade.
Well, it's like all of these things are very inexpensive if you're doing them when you're building the house and not trying to retrofit them or fix something that, has gone wrong. The one thing I wanted to mention is that like houses are still valued like almost exclusively on like a square footage and location cost versus any semblance of how they're built, outside of like finishes and fixtures, maybe in kitchens and bathrooms. And I want to say I want to say the passive house folks are developing some standards for energy efficiency, and it's like until those standards are like accepted by the modern financing system, it really comes down to that, like what the value of the house is and like what it can be sold for. I think more so than what buyers value, although like buyers are then trained to value the things that make a house sell for the price it's selling for.
I think that I love the point you made, Andrew, that this all would seem very logical if your basement were full of water instead, right? Like if you just built this house and then come springtime, your basement fills up, you would have wished you did this stuff.
The one place there are a few builders I've talked to who have sort of built family cabins for wealthy Minnesotans in northern Minnesota, and they're thinking about sort of generational housing, maybe more in the way that somebody in Europe would be thinking about building a house. Like the idea that this house is going to be here for hundreds of years, and multiple generations of this family that I care about are going to be using it. It's sort of like in that case, the folks commissioning the house build, want to think about these things that improve the longevity of houses. But that's not a scenario where this reader is or listener is writing about, where you're building a house and you're planning to move in a few years.
I think that's the complete nut of the whole conversation, right? Is if this is for you, it probably makes a lot of sense. If it's for your insurability, that makes a lot of sense. But I think it's reasonable to assume that most folks do not see the value in these upgrades, even if they're very logical. It's just not, they don't understand is probably how it could be best described.
When I was preparing some of my rental houses over the past 2 years to sell, and I talked to my agent who I've worked with for the last 15 years, who's knowledgeable about building it as well as real estate. And I said, okay, I'm thinking, maybe I blow some more insulation in the attic and I do this up and I do this. And he goes, no, take some bleach. I said, well, how about if I, repaint the outside of the house? It looks kind of shabby. He goes, you know what? He said, take a pump sprayer, 4-to-1 bleach, spray it. That'll take care of the mold. Hose it down. It'll look good. Sell it. So it's like he's basically telling me, cut every corner you can. Don't improve anything. Sell it as it is, because you're not going to get any value out of the extra work you're going to do. Sad truth.
It's kind of sad, but that is the fact in our culture, right?
Yeah.
So, Jeff, as I recall, the house you currently own was built by a builder for him or herself. Isn't that right?
No, it was built as a spec house. So.
And did the agent, when you looked at the place, tell you how well it was built and explain all the underground details about the construction?
No.
I'm surprised.
Similar, like one of the coolest houses I saw while we were looking for a home about 5 years ago. An architect who had designed and built a bunch of buildings on a college campus at St. Olaf in Northfield, Minnesota, had also built his own house in, I think it was like in the late 50s, and used the same building techniques that he used on the buildings. And so this was, I think the footprint was like 50 by 100, and it was 2 levels, and it was all spancrete with a flat roof. And it was just like the coolest mid-century house, and it had, it like abutted creek, and there was like full-length deck on the back. It was awesome. We didn't get it. I still think about it. I saved all the pictures, but like part of the deal was at the open house, the architect's original plans were there on the table for you to look at, and you could see all of the thought and work he had put into it, and like the specific details, especially around drainage, caught my eye. But he had also planned, so like because it is all spancrete, there's no interior load-bearing walls, and he had like 3 different designs for like the master bedroom suite could also be a mother-in-law apartment, and like the downstairs bedrooms could be reconfigured into office spaces. It was the coolest thing, but like finding those houses where a builder built it for him or herself, that sort of seems like the like real estate gold mine for me. When
assuming it's the right builder.
Yeah, it's not a cobbler's kids have no shoes scenario.
Well, you could appreciate all that, but I wonder how many people could or would appreciate all of that forethought that went into that design, as well as the choices of materials and how things were laid out.
Well, frankly, most folks don't even understand how to read plans, right? They don't know what they're looking at.
It was also a very beautiful house architecturally, and it was like you'd have to go through a couple of steps to be like, why does it feel so big and open in here? Why are the ceilings so tall? And then it's like, oh, because you don't need to have interior support, and that lets you have these big open beautiful space. Like, yeah, but it's the one that I still think about when I'm in in my basement or attic working on all the projects.
I was just about to say, speaking of amazing architectural accomplishments, we're going to talk about your house in the after show, so I look forward to that. It's been a pleasure talking to you guys, as always, and I want to thank our listeners for their amazing feedback and questions that help keep the show going. So I would be really grateful if you would all continue that and send us some questions or topics of conversation for the regular show or the after show. I'd love to hear from you. Well, here we go. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks to Mike, Andrew, and Jeff for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive. Thanks very much for listening. Happy building.